Hi, everyone. Welcome to B Vectoring Technologies live corporate webinar. This is Will Mays with RB Milestone. B Vectoring Technologies is an agricultural technology company and a market disruptor in the $240 billion crop protection and fertilizer market. BVT has pioneered a natural precision agricultural system that successfully replaces chemical pesticides and wasteful plant protection product spray applications by delivering a biological pesticide alternative to crops using commercially grown bees as well as other delivery methods. The shares are traded on the CSE under the symbol BEE and on the OTCQB under the symbol BEVVF. Joining us today is the company's CEO, Ashish Malik, who will be going through B Vectoring's investor presentation. This will include a brief overview of the company's strategy and current operations, as well as upcoming operational timeline. At the end of the presentation, we'll open it up for a Q&A for management to address. And if you're interested in asking a question or logged into the Zoom app or web platform, you can submit your questions to us directly in the Q&A module. Please note this presentation is being recorded today, Wednesday, March 23rd, 2023, and will soon be made available on the company's website at www.bevt.com. Sorry, that's www.beevt.com. Today's call may contain forward-looking statements that are subject to risks and uncertainties that may cause actual results, performance, or developments to differ materially from those contained in the statements, and are not guarantees of future performance of the company. No assurances can be given that any of these events anticipated by forward-looking statements will occur, and if they do occur, what benefits the company will obtain from them. Also, some risks and uncertainties may be out of control of the company. B Vectoring has a full disclaimer contained in its presentation. Lastly, RBMG is not a registered investment advisor or broker-dealer. For more information, please visit rbmilestone.com. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Ashish Malik, Chief Executive Officer of B Vectoring. Ashish, the stage is yours.
Great, thank you, Will. Just, I hope everybody can hear me. Can you just confirm that everything's good?
Confirmed.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, or good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on which part of the world our audience is in. It's my pleasure to give an update on BVT. As Will mentioned, we're going to cover several topics, and hopefully we'll have a good 15 or so minutes available at the end for a Q&A session. The topics that I'd like to cover are an overall company and market context about the BVT technology. I know that we have some people that are followers that know our story, but we also have got several new participants, so I think it would be good to quickly run through that. And then, of course, what is our strategy and where are we in 2023, progress against that strategy, and then end some comments on the investment window. So BVT as a company is a company that's about 10 years old. We were founded in 2012. Under the mission of delivering and developing an all-natural precision agricultural system. So I should note that we're the only company that's actually doing this, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. But our mission is to replace synthetic chemicals by delivering simple and validated biological alternatives using bees, seed treatment, and other delivery methods. And we'll talk about each of these as we move forward. The promise of our technology and what we've proven is that we have an environmentally friendly solution for growers. Growers, of course, are our core customers, and we have demonstrated over these last 10 years and the last 3 years that we've been a commercial enterprise that we can increase their crop yields and profitability with the use of no chemicals or genetically modified organisms. We have growing business momentum. We have a platform technology, and we'll talk more about that. We're not just a single product with a high quality and diverse revenue stream with very strong protected IP, good patent portfolio. And we are now in our ongoing business expansion phase with new product applications. We're advancing into new markets, and we're developing partnerships. The team, just a few comments, very well experienced. We have collectively many years of experience, close to 100 years of experience in the global crop protection markets. The team has worked in a startup environment, worked with large global multinationals, Bayer Crop Science, Syngenta, AMVAC, amongst others. And then complementing the management team is a very strong advisory board. The founder of the company is still very active as a director. And then we also have Dr. John Sutton, who is the father of our Clonostachys rosea technology, who, while he's retired as a professor, is still quite active as a scientific advisor for the company. So I want to take a pause and just talk a little bit about what's going on in global agriculture, where there is an aggressive need and a very real need to increase farm productivity. But that can come in many different ways. So for a moment, I wanted you to think about and imagine an agricultural productivity tool that significantly increases yields for farmers. So unless a technology can show that there is an improvement in the bottom line to the farmers, it's not going to get very widely adopted. So imagine for a second a technology that's been demonstrated to get yield increases as high as 30% and produce a very consumer-friendly crop. Imagine that same system that doesn't use any chemicals or genetically modified organisms, because these are products that can increase yields, but of course now we know that they have non-desirable effects and they affect non-target organisms, and it's something that consumers aren't willing to accept. So the technology that I want you to imagine is one that's safe for consumers, for workers, and the environment. Imagine that same technology that doesn't use water. So agriculture is the biggest user of fresh water on the world. We use something like 21% of the world's fresh water on agricultural lands around the world. So imagine a system that doesn't use any fresh water. And imagine a system that does not rely on fossil fuels. It's all natural, so it doesn't have an impact on climate change. We do know that agriculture is also a big contributor, somewhere between 10 to 15% of global gas emissions. Now, as you think about this, what I want you to imagine now is that, what you want to think about now is that you don't need to really imagine this because this technology exists today. That is what BVT is all about in a nutshell. The company, as I mentioned, was founded in 2012. We are a public company, as Will already mentioned, traded in Canada, in the US over the counter. We also traded on the German exchanges. We are in revenue, first revenue in 2020, and now we've started our product expansion phases. So at the heart of our systems and our technology are two core sets of assets. One is the biological crop treatment agent itself. So these are products that have a symbiotic relationship with the crops once they're applied to the crop, and they help the farmer manage different diseases, or they'll increase plant growth through hormonal effects, turning on certain hormone effects within the plant, making the plant healthier and making the plant produce a greater yield. So these are products like our Clonostachys rosea CR7, but we're also working with third-party products that could help within the paradigm of bee vectoring. So that's one side of our business, the biological crop protection agents, which are alternatives to chemicals. On the other hand is the delivery system, which by using managed beehives, whether they're bumblebee hives or they're honeybee hives, these represent an alternative to spraying. So spraying is an inherently inefficient way to deliver a product to a crop, in that there's a lot of wasted products. If you think about a field where a farmer would spray a product onto their crop, whether it's a chemical or a biological, a lot of the product gets wasted. It gets involved in the air drift, water runoff, it falls between the rows of the plants. Roughly only 2% of the product actually reaches the plant and the flower of the plant. So bee vectoring is a very efficient way to deliver the product directly to the flower. So as you combine these two systems, the company has developed unique IP around 5 different areas of technology. We have something like 60 or 65 patents around the world protecting the business. I mentioned the value that we've been able to demonstrate to our growers. This is an example of a strawberry field where we've looked at how we control gray mold botrytis. On the left side, you see how we can control botrytis over the course of a growing season in that strawberry operation. using about 20 grams of active ingredient to control botrytis and gray mold, versus a traditional method where the farmer would spray 4 kilograms of a conventional fungicide to control that same disease. So if you do the math, that is a 1/200th of the amount of active ingredient that's actually applied to the crop. So it's precision delivery. Oh, by the way, you're talking about delivering a natural biological product without, and not a chemical, without the use of water and fossil fuels. And then the most exciting part for me is that we've demonstrated that increases profitability for the customer, right? So we've seen higher yields, 30% higher yields, and better bottom line for the farmer. That's strawberries. This is an example where we've actually aggregated several years, and this is actually 5 years worth of data on blueberries from trials and demonstrations where we've measured disease control and marketable yield in the United States and Canada and Mexico, as well as in Europe. And here what you see is, we call this a piano graph. You see a series of trials where we've looked at the BVT system added to the grower standard compared to the grower standard alone. On the left, you see the amounts of time that we've actually exceeded the current grower standard, and we've demonstrated on average a 43% yield increase, 43% increase in disease control, different diseases, because different regions are dealing with different blueberry diseases. And then on the right-hand side, you see also the instances in which we've measured marketable yield increases. Not in all cases do the growers actually monitor their yield. So these are it's a fewer sample set, but you can see in the 11 cases when we've gone and actually been able to compare the yield from the BVT plus grower standard compared to the grower standard alone, we see an average of 24%. And I want you to remember that 24% number, because we'll come back to that in a future slide. The point here is, what we find, these are real commercial locations. These are not small plot, ideal controlled environment trials. You certainly do that for an R&D purpose, but these are real commercial grower demos. And what we're finding is the farmers are using our system more and more together with their conventional spray technology, and they're seeing an added effect. They're seeing a yield increase as well as an improvement in disease control. So that's the value proposition. Now, what is BVT doing? And here we start going into a little bit of our strategy. And this is a little bit different than you may have heard from me in the past. We are now certainly developing the bee vectoring systems for bumblebees and honeybees. It gives us access to a wide variety of indoor as well as outdoor crops. It's a system that we are commercial with both sets of insects in the United States, and now we've started the geographic expansion. What's new is what we've done in the last 12 months, and we'll spend a fair amount of time talking about this, which is to develop our CR7 product for more traditional applications. And what we're finding is we really have a unique biological fungicide in our portfolio, which fits not only for bee delivery, but also fits in more conventional application methods as replacements for chemicals like foliar or drench applications or even seed treatments. These are markets where we don't have a distribution channel, we don't have inherent expertise in. So these are markets that we will develop through partners. Okay, so how does this all translate to revenue and revenue generation for the company? So if you think about, the assets that I just talked about with biological control agents on the one side, and on here you see on the left side, and then you think about the targeted applications of the biological control agents and how they could replace chemicals in those applications. Today we have commercialized the use of our CR7 through our bee vectoring systems in the United States, right? So the revenue and the revenue generation that the company has today is through this direction. We have now started working, however, on taking that know-how that we've got from the US commercialization and development and expanding the geographic footprint. And you'll hear more about that in future slides. So as we look forward, you'll see more revenue streams coming online as these geographic expansions are completed and we gain the license to operate in those jurisdictions. We've also started looking at third-party products and how they could be used within the bee vectoring system and therefore increase the amount of pests that our system could control. Now, we're not going to talk a lot about this area today. We have not, because of some budgetary constraints and prioritization that we've had to do internally, these are projects that we've largely put on a lower priority than some of the geographic expansion and foliar and seed treatment projects, which have very exciting outcomes in front of us. Nonetheless, there is work that is teed up around third-party products for bee vectoring. Then the third area, which we'll talk about a fair amount today, is new markets for CR7. So here we're talking about taking our biological control agent, which is very, very unique as we learn more and more about it and as we characterize it further, and then developing data to then enable discussions with partners to develop foliar, soil applied, or even seed treatment markets. So what you can see here is we really have a platform technology which over time will generate several revenue streams. Okay, so let's talk about these. So the first element of our strategy, of course, is commercialization in the US. Where are we? And I'll get into this. We're well underway. We have demonstrated and proven our fit in large-scale commercial agriculture. I mentioned that 2020 was our launch year. We launched in a very targeted way and a pilot basis in Georgia on blueberries. So I would say 2021 was really our first year in revenue. I'm repeating. You can see this on our financials. We got 50 or close to 50% revenue growth in that year. We gained about 40 customers overall. Very importantly, and we'll come back to this again, we had 100% customer retention in that launch market in Georgia, and we were on our way by opening up additional markets as well as securing the California registration. In 2022, what you'll see is that the revenue growth was 25%, but it's really a story of two coins. So in the newer markets, we had 78% growth. We had almost 4x growth, over 4x growth in the Pacific Northwest, 46% growth in the Midwest and Northeast, and we got our first revenues in California. And kind of on the other side of the coin was a much smaller, only 4% growth in Georgia. However, what I want to point out here is the environmental conditions, the weather conditions in Georgia were such that there were hard freezes in the February-March timeframe in 2022, which actually led to a lot of crop losses for the farmers. A lot of the blueberry growers actually had to turn to their insurance companies to get paid for that season. And of course, they didn't use any crop protection products. They also had skyrocketing fertilizer prices, which meant that they were spending less money on their agricultural inputs. What I can tell you is a lot of our peers actually had reduced sales year on year in 2022. So us, even though it's only a modest 4% increase in revenue, which actually meant an increase in market share. The third thing I want to point out, it didn't really affect us in 2022, but we're seeing some impacts of this issue as we go into 2023. And this is the ongoing constraints on supply chain. We source a lot of our plastic parts and, very importantly, the electronic parts that go into our honeybee system from China and Asian markets. And what we started seeing is 12-month lead times on these electronic components, which really we could see started putting somewhat of a limit on the number of new dispensers that we could build for the 2023 season, because we had to plan a year ahead of time, and that was a little unexpected. So we'll talk about how that can impact us on 2023 in a minute. The good news about 2022 is we continue to start seeing tremendous increase in value of our system. So what we measured for the first time in 2022 was the distribution of the size of the berries. So we measured the diameter of the blueberries on the BVT treated area compared to the grower standard alone, and also the weight of those berries. And what you see on the left-hand side is a shift. So you would expect a normal distribution on size of the berries, which if you look at the gray chart on the grower standard, averaged around 17 millimeters. We saw a shift to 18 millimeters and higher when we look at the areas where the BVT system was used. So this is pretty significant, and we'll come back to what that means from a dollar perspective in a minute here. But what I can tell you is that here we're talking about data that was collected over 48 different plots. So these are 24 plots each, where we compared 24 plots with the grower standard against 24 plots where the BVT system was added. And you see a similar increase in weight distribution also, where we actually had 26.67% higher blueberries. Now, what this actually means, there's two value propositions that come from this. On the left, what you see is there's this notion around jumbo packs. So these are packs where you have bigger berries, and the growers actually can get paid more for jumbo pack sizes versus the normal pack sizes. And there's a certain expectation that the growers have around how many jumbo packs they'll get over the course of the season. And we don't have any hard data on this, but we predict and we kind of guess that a good season for the grower would be if they get somewhere between 10 to 15% of their overall pack out in those jumbo packs. What we see is, and then jumbo packs is a higher price, as I mentioned. What we see is with the BVT system, they actually get a lot more jumbo packs. We've also seen earlier, remember we had talked about the 24% yield increase. Here we see a similar number, 26.67% increase in weight. So when you do the math on that, and we look at kind of the average of blueberry prices that the growers get, and we've looked at USDA data over the last several years, and we look at average production in terms of number of pounds per acre, and I apologize for our metric fans here in the US, we still use pounds and we still use acres. But this basically translates to an increased revenue opportunity for the farmers in the Pacific Northwest of around $10,000, which translates to somewhere around a 42 to 43% return on investment. So these are very real economic value drivers for the farmer, which have led into which we captured in 22, which leads us into what's going on in 2023. So this season, of course, we are kind of halfway through the season. We still have, a lot of the Pacific Northwest and Midwest and even New Jersey markets to go. So just a couple of comments on 2023, and we'll be announcing more, events through press releases as new agreements and new developments for 23 are generated. But in general, what I can say is that we again are seeing very high retention rates, and what we're seeing, which is even better for us, is the retention rates with the big customers. So you have all kinds of growers, right? You have growers that are bona fide, hundreds of thousands of acres of operation that run their operation as a business. And then at the other extreme, you're the guys that may have 4 or 5 acres that are, what we call U-pick farmers. These are community farmers where, people that live within the community can bring their kids on a weekend and pick their own berries. And these are people that will be in business one year, they may not be in business the next year, so they come and go. What we're seeing is very high retention rates, 80% and higher amongst those larger customers. And those are the sticky customers that we want, okay? We're also seeing new markets that are opening up. So for example, we got our first revenue in California blueberries. Now this is quite interesting because California blueberries are not prone to high disease pressures like you might see in the Pacific Northwest, but the grower is still interested in was interested in using our system because of the value proposition around higher yield. We're also looking at some major growing regions in the Pacific Northwest that we're hoping will open up. I should say that we're expecting will open up. And there's some new customers. So there's new customers, particularly in the Pacific Northwest, some large operations that looked at the data from last year around bigger diameters and higher berry weight size, that we expect some of these customers are going to be first-time customers in 2023. And then the last point, and we'll talk about this a little later as well, is new applications. We are expecting, we announced our partnership with BioSafe at the beginning of this year. We're working very closely with them to try to accelerate and get into the market this year. And we're hopeful that we will have first revenue through the BioSafe partnership in the foliar and soil applied area as well in 2023. The second element of our strategy is geographic expansion. So this, we're taking our know-how and the data and the studies that we completed for US registration, and we're expanding beyond the US borders. A quick overview of where we are on some of these projects. Before I get into the specifics of each project, I do want to point out that the industry generally, whether it's North America, whether it's Europe, whether it's Latin America, is quite frustrated with the whole regulatory environment. There's no harmonization of data requirements across different geographies around the world. So you really have to tailor your submission to what that jurisdiction requires. And on the opposite side, the one common element that we are seeing is every single regulatory agency, in particular as it relates to biologicals, is far, far behind where they should be. Every single submission is taking longer than expected. I don't know if this is an ongoing effect from COVID when submissions were made, but staffing went down, so there's a long backlog, or it's just the new reality where governments are cutting funding of the different regulatory agencies. And I see this. I'm a director of the Biologicals Product Industry Alliance, the trade association, and I know that a lot of my peers, a lot of our peers, are equally frustrated with whether it's the EPA, the PMRA in Canada, the COFEPRIS in Mexico, the EFSA, and the regulatory bodies in Europe. It's the common theme that's coming across. That being said, we did submit in Mexico about a year ago in April of 2022. We do know that we are in the queue. We don't know exactly how big the backlog is, and as we know more, we'll be able to share more with everyone. Peru, we've just started. We do have an import permit approval. We're talking to our consultant in Peru to figure out what's possible to accomplish in 2023 in terms of some trials. Canada, we submitted. We had pre-submission meetings with the PMRA, which is part of Health Canada, last year, and we finished the submission in December, just before the holidays. In Europe, we've had pre-submission consultations. We've actually had a couple of different consultations with the authorities. We've chosen our rapporteur member state because in EU, you actually choose one country where you submit. The country does the review and makes a recommendation to the European Food Safety Agency. So all that's been done. We're in the process of preparing the dossier, and everything goes well with that, and there's no last minute hiccups. We're expecting to submit sometime later in 2023. Switzerland, I know that there's been a lot of some questions that have come across Switzerland, about Switzerland. Obviously, we've submitted there for a number of years, and this goes back to what I said earlier. The frustration is that you basically get one email a year to give you kind of the status update of what's going on. What we do know in 2022, the Swiss authorities started asking a lot of questions around the genetics of CR7. So the frustration here is it became a moving target. These weren't questions that were required when you submitted back in 2018, I believe we submitted in Switzerland, but now the bar keeps increasing. They're asking questions about the genetics of the Gliocladium or Clonostachys genus, which we are working with some experts in Denmark and in with other universities around the world to help us write the responses to those questions. So hopefully we'll get that back on track in 2023. There are other geographic expansions: Turkey, Morocco, Israel, South Africa. Now here, we're not spending our precious resources to advance these. So here we're somewhat at the mercy of how fast the partners move, but we do have good partners in all of 4 of these areas. I do know that in Israel and in South Africa, there's quite some progress in 2023 towards getting some trials placed. Turkey, Morocco, the partners are more in the negotiations and discussions with the local authorities in terms of what's required from a development perspective. Okay, the third part of our strategy is portfolio expansion, and I'm going to really focus here about new applications for CR7. So I want to take a minute to kind of, and I don't know if I've actually shared this with this kind of an audience before, but CR7 is an extremely unique and good biological beneficial organism. But it is an endophytic fungus, and by endophytic, what we're talking about is it can live within and inside the plant, in the plant tissue. It's ubiquitous, it's found in soils around the world. It's associated with a wide variety of plant species. And this is important because if you've got a very exotic strain, then the regulators are going to say, well, wait a minute, it's not native in my environment. I don't want to introduce a non-native species into my country. And that can present a whole set of issues. So ubiquitous microbes are easy, relatively speaking, to get registered. This particular strain was isolated from over 1,400 different isolates, was chosen from over 1,400 isolates that Dr. John Sutton, and remember I mentioned him when we were talking about our advisors at the very beginning, he chose this because of its unique properties for rapid reproduction and stability in the field. And, we've actually developed it. We've characterized it. We understand its mode of action more now. Every year, we're learning more and more about how it works. And what we're finding that it's a very useful tool for crop production purposes. Its mode of action, there's 3 identified modes of action. One is through competitive exclusion. So it occupies plant tissue. And as it occupies the plant tissue, it takes away the space for the pathogen to come in and attack that same plant. We also know that the Clonostachys rosea strain CR7 turns on certain plant gene responses, turns on certain hormones. Jasmonic acid is one pathway that we turn on, and that actually increases the plant growth for the particular plant. So that's the second mode of action. The third one is mycoparasitism. We've actually seen in microscopes, we can see this, where CR7 actually can go and antagonize pathogens as well. So this is a third mode of action, which leads to this slide, which is kind of, it's a busy slide, and I apologize. But what I want to say here is resistance management within the crop protection realm is very, very important, and CR7 is useful in that process. What do I mean by resistance management? So the direct analogy is you can think about is resistance of bacteria to antibiotics, right? So when we go see our doctor and they diagnose us with a particular bacterial infection, they have to very carefully choose the antibiotic that's been shown to be selective against that bacteria, and that the bacteria hasn't developed resistance against. The same thing happens in crop protection. Pathogens develop resistance to fungicides. So having another tool that can help manage that development of resistance within that crop pathogen system is very important. It means the more tools that you have, the farmer has with diverse modes of action, means the longer you can preserve any given tool in the tool basket for the farmer. So we submitted everything that we know about CR7 and its mode of action to an industry committee called FRAC, the Fungicide Resistance Action Committee. They accepted our data, which shows that we have a bona fide fungicide and have given us a new FRAC code. And this is something we are code BMO2, which you don't need to understand the technical aspects of, but it is important in how we market our product because it shows that we've got a different mode of action than chemical fungicides do. So once we characterize CR7 in terms of how it works, we wanted to next characterize what are the crop systems and pathogens that we control in the field. Now, we know a fair amount about CR7 because of our work with de-vectoring, but what we did in 2022 was looked at what about other pathogens, what about other diseases and other crops where de-vectoring wouldn't be used? What's our overall spectrum of control? So we developed this kind of a heat map. And again, I don't need you to memorize this, but my point here is I want to show you the tools that we're developing that will now enable us to start discussions, enable discussions with possible foliar partners. So here we developed data that showed we could be a very good product for tomatoes, in leafy greens, certainly gray mold in grapes, in vines, anthracnose in cucumbers and zucchini. These are all diseases where a lot of chemical fungicides are being used on the one side, but also there's very real concerns about residues of chemicals because these are fresh fruits, fresh crops, produce that we care about, having no or zero or low chemical residues. So this characterization work shows that we do have a broad spectrum biofungicide that can serve many different crops. It allows a partner and us to develop kind of the business case by region once you've kind of got an idea of the spectrum of control. It's the kind of work that led to our first partnership with BioSafe, which we have announced. We will and we expect the 2023 launch through BioSafe. I do want to make one point that BioSafe, the arrangement with them is non-exclusive, so it doesn't limit us, it doesn't encumber us from pursuing other partnerships, perhaps with even bigger, larger global multinationals. So the opportunity for foliar drench is quite large. I'm looking at my watch. I want to make sure we have time for questions, so I'm going to try to speed up here. It's quite large, $2 billion. It is a somewhat crowded space. There are many biofungicides out in the market, but what ends up happening is partners are always looking for new products. So, company A might have a biological fungicide in a portfolio on an exclusive basis, but company B wants to get one, and that represents an opportunity for us. So those are the kinds of conversations that we're now able to have and are beginning to have already. Seed treatment is another area that's very exciting, and we shared some results through a press release a month or 6 weeks ago. Give you an idea of the kind of work that we did. We now have 2 years of field work that showed CR7 compared against base seed treatments. So these were very complex trials where we tested 2 different product concepts. How do we fit in with other biologicals that are used in soybean seed treatments, but also how could we be used to control this emerging disease called SDS, which is a disease called Southern Death Syndrome, which affects soybeans not only in North America, but also in Brazil and Argentina. We looked at different treatments, 7 different treatments overall. We looked at 4 different growing regions across the US. We had 9 different sets of data that were collected. So there was a lot of data that we got from these field studies. And it was all done with partnership with a very well-known product development firm with global expertise called AgriAuthority. Just want to share a couple of things of what we learned. Here's some pictures. So what you compare here is in each set of photographs, the leftmost one is the soybean or some soybean plants that were pulled out, where you looked at the biomass. You could see the rooting systems as well as the above ground biomass. T1 is the base seed treatment. These are 5 different products, chemicals and biologicals that are used in that we tested against, that are used in soybeans. And then and then T2 and T6, or T3 and T7, are 2 different applications of CR7, low dose and high dose, where you can see much bigger soybean plants. You can actually see bigger roots, and you can see also a better development above ground. You see we saw higher yields in 2021. We didn't get yield data, but in 2022 we did. And what you see here again is that same piano graph concept where I showed for blueberries previously. This is each individual data that was collected, where we compared when the BVT system was used together with the base seed treatment compared to the base seed treatment alone. And what you can see is, 7 times out of 10 or 8 times out of 10 respectively, low rate and high rate, the BVT treatment actually exceeded the base seed treatment, on average producing 3 bushels per acre more in both cases. This is significant, and I can give you kind of a personal insight here. When I was at Bayer Crop Science, the target for us was about a 70% win rate. We would commercialize, and of course, Bayer had the resources to do hundreds of trials, right? Here you're looking at 16 data points, but they were always looking for win rates of 70% or greater in order to advance a system or a technology to ultimate commercialization. It's very unusual. It's almost impossible to get a 100% win rate. So this leads to the kind of where we are on partnership discussions with soybeans. Now that we have 2 years worth of data, we've got a good starting point to have these discussions. We are doing that a lot in 2023. There's about 10 companies that we're in contact with, and we'll see, and we hope that 1 or 2 will emerge as partners or potential partner candidates for us. This is a big market opportunity, right? There's roughly 320 million acres of soybeans that are grown primarily in 3 countries, right? US, Brazil, and Argentina. There are distinct markets. There's the seed companies as well as downstream applications. Also, the technology is very specialized. They use polymers and colors and things like that on how to coat the seeds. So definitely you want to work with a partner who's got that knowledge. It's not something that BVT could do on our own. So definitely this is a partnering approach. So kind of concluding, with a few slides here, where we are in 2023 is, the company's got that single revenue stream around CR7 in the US, and our valuation is largely based on that initial revenue stream. But as you look at these projects moving forward, you think about the geographic expansion that we've started, you think about foliar, seed treatment, et cetera. In a few years, the valuation in 2025, the valuation will be based on multiple revenue streams. I can also say that, biologics and the areas that we are focusing on is a very active space in the M&A area. A lot of the larger companies are partnering with, or in some cases buying, smaller biological startups. This is a list of some deals that have occurred in the recent past. The one at the very top is one that I was personally involved with in 2012, where we were acquired. AgriQuest, the company that I was working with on the executive team, was acquired for $425 million when we had about 17 million in revenue. So the point here is that revenue is not the driver. So obviously we went for 32 times a revenue multiple. Bayer bought us not because of the revenue number we had, but because of the technology, the IP, and the kind of addressable market that the company had opened up. So as we execute this strategy, it is possible that there may also be an exit or a partnership with a large company that is in our future. So in closing, when we think about, ag tech, there's a lot of companies that are working in the ag tech area. There's a lot of investment that's coming in. And we kind of looked at what do we think is the criteria that's going to separate, the wheat from the chaff, right? Which are the companies that are going to win within this very active ag tech ecosystem? And I think there's 5 areas that the larger companies are looking for. A proven low impact solution that increases crop yield. And we've demonstrated that. We've demonstrated higher yield. We've demonstrated potentials in 98% reduction of chemicals. We've demonstrated a system that doesn't use any water or rely on fossil fuels. High quality, validated revenue mix. We are registered in the EPA. We're getting, revenue growth in high value crops, and we're opening up new markets. So we're not a single crop opportunity. It is a platform technology which can, companies that want to partner with smaller companies don't do it because the company may have a single product. They want to see a vision where multiple revenue streams could come out of that platform. The opportunity is global. We've done trials. I only shared some trials with you, but we've got over 70 trials in 6 countries on multiple crops. It shows that the opportunity is quite diverse. And then finally, we have strong and protected IP. So this is clearly, if a large company is going to want to partner or invest with a smaller company, they don't want to do it if that's going to enable up competition. So having a strong competitive barrier is also very important. Okay, so with that, I'm going to close my prepared comments and turn it back to you, Will, for the Q&A session.
Great. Thanks, Ashish, and thanks for a very insightful presentation. As Ashish said, we are now moving to the Q&A portion of the presentation. And if you would like to ask questions, you can feel free to do so in the Q&A portion of the Zoom app. We have had questions coming in here. I wanted to get right to it in view of time. So the first question we have here, Ashish, is do you see commercial success in the agreement with BioSafe from earlier this year, and are they selling your products?
Yeah, I mean, so we're trying to compress the time. The great thing about BioSafe is they're relatively small. I mean, they're much bigger than we are. They've got 20 people in the field, but they're still a relatively small family-owned company, and they want to move fast, right? And just like we do, right? So the 2 companies have got together. We made the announcement in January, and we're working very, collaboratively to try to get on the market this year. So I am cautiously optimistic that we will have revenue in 2023 through that partnership. Now, it's not going to be significant revenue, but it'll certainly prime the pump with their distribution channel, right? So this is clearly a very exciting development for us. So yes, we are expecting, I'm forecasting that we will have some revenue through that partnership this season.
Great. Next question that came in is that this investor is interested to know what types of pests you have been able to reduce or eliminate. And also, is this product applicable to the cannabis market?
To the cannabis market, okay. So so remember I shared earlier about the work that we did to characterize CR7 more fully. So as it relates to the bee vectoring kind of paradigm, the application method, we control flowering diseases, and these are, we call them necrotrophic diseases. It's a big technical term, but it basically means we control pathogens that feed off of senescing or dying plant tissue, right? Those are the kinds of products that we can control. And in that group are, diseases like botrytis or gray mold, which affects many different flowering crops. White mold, which is sclerotinia, which also affects many different crops. Monolinea mummyberry affects, blueberries amongst others. So we know that, but now we know that we control other pathogens, soil pathogens, as well as some other anthracnose and others through the work that we did on the characterization of the foliar side. So we've got, it's fungal diseases that we control pretty broad spectrum, not every fungal disease out there, but a very large group of diseases, which would make it a very valuable tool in foliar and soil applied product. Cannabis in particular. So cannabis, I honestly don't know about all of the diseases in the cannabis growing industry that growers are facing. I can tell you that bees aren't used in cannabis production. So the opportunity on that crop will be through the foliar and soil drench of application. And I can tell you that that is a big area of focus for BioSafe. So I think you'll start seeing, as the BioSafe partnership advances, that products containing CR7 will become available to the cannabis growers as well.
Very interesting. Thank you. There's been several questions on basically the same topic, and in essence, investors are wondering what is the timeline for revenues and profitability.
Well, we have revenues right now, but I mean, I guess I'm assuming the question is about revenue growth and when will it become
right,
significant, therefore leading to profitability. I mean, it's a good question, right? I mean, I think this is a natural question for a lot of people to have in their minds. But what I want to remind everyone is, I mean, obviously revenue growth and profitability is important, but remember what I said earlier, it's one of many things that drive value creation in an ag tech company, right? So, what we feel, and I can tell you from personal experience at AgriQuest, and I can tell you from personal experience from what I see within the industry, deals with larger companies get made not because the company is EBITDA positive or has 10 million in revenue. It's made because the company has demonstrated its fit in commercial agriculture in multiple regions around the world, in multiple crops around the world, has strong IP, and can see this as a way that they can introduce this technology into their much bigger sales and marketing engines to ultimately increase revenue dramatically. So shareholder value in the context of value creation in the context of ag tech comes from increasing addressable market. It's more milestones. It's more regulatory submissions and ultimately regulatory approvals. It's about taking a technology from bee vectoring over into foliar and seed treatment. Those are the kinds of things that we believe are value creating milestones for the company. So, so yes, revenue and profitability clearly are important, but the company has made some trade-offs and decisions. We're not investing $250,000 for each new sales rep, which when you add salary, commissions, and travel time is what it costs. Because getting another $500,000 in revenue, 2 years after putting that sales rep in the ground, doesn't have, we believe, the same effect from a value creation perspective than getting registration in Europe or Mexico or a seed treatment application would. So it is a trade-off. What that means is, if we wanted to, choose to drive for profitability just for a US bee vectoring business, we could probably do that in the next 12 months. But that's not what we believe is going to create long-term value for our shareholders.
Great, thanks. So it's very similar to the biotech industry.
It absolutely is. I mean, I think the analogies in ag tech and biotech are very real. Biotech companies will spend their resources to get FDA approval, maybe get approval in Europe, but then they'll license their technology to a larger pharma company, and ultimately, if that leads to an exit, it leads to an exit. Otherwise, it's a commercial deal. Very analogous to what happens in ag tech as well.
Great. Next question is coming in regarding CR7, and is licensing out CR7 to bigger players, is that an option for BVT?
It is. I mean, obviously, it's a pretty valuable asset. So before you license it on a, call it exclusive basis, you want to make sure that it's an impactful enough deal for the company. Maybe it comes in with non-dilutive, a non-dilutive cash payment to give those rights to someone. It's certainly an option. It's not the only way, though. I mean, for example, with BioSafe, I already mentioned that it was done on a non-exclusive basis. That's not the company that we would sell it on an exclusive basis to, right? They're just not, you know, and they're not a Syngenta or an FMC or a UPL or a Bayer of the world. So, but yes, it is an option, and it's something that we will evaluate on a case-by-case basis as those partnership discussions continue.
Great. We've got time for maybe two more.
Okay.
This investor is asking, wondering what is happening in the efforts of CR7 in the almonds and sunflower market.
Yeah. Okay, good question. So, these are, I mentioned earlier that agriculture is kind of a very finicky industry because you are somewhat, reliant on how good the data is that you get when you're doing development. And in a lot of these cases, in both sunflowers and almonds in particular, you only have one opportunity a year, right? That's when the crop blooms, you do your trials, and then you're kind of at the mercy of how the season develops to see the quality of the data. Let me talk about almonds for a minute. We've done work in almonds for the last 2 years, both in 21 and in 2022. Central Valley in California was bone dry. There was no development of disease. So we did, I think 7 trials last year. I think one of them produced valuable data. And in fact, we're talking to the partners that were involved in there to see what we can do with the data that we got. Because there was no disease that was developed, right? So we showed that the BVT system was used, that it was delivered. So when you don't have, the brown rot that gets developed that they're concerned with, you're not going to get a separation on treatment. Now, I can turn to you. I can tell you what's going on in almonds in 2023 because I live in the Central Valley. I live in Sacramento, so there's a lot of almonds around where I grow. The polar opposite. We're getting driving rain. I mean, I don't know if you all have seen pictures of the flooding across the Central Valley in California, even the coastal valley. It is amazing. And I drive around and I have literally seen beehives that are underwater. So this is going to be a very, very hard year for almond growers, a very hard year for beekeepers. And I know had we done trials this year, we would not have got any meaningful data again this year. So, we haven't done any work in almonds in 2023. It's obviously a crop that we are interested in because of its sheer size. But I think we have to kind of regroup and think about that maybe for next year. Maybe also it's a very expensive. Each trial in almonds is something like $30,000. So you have to think a little bit about, is that a good use of our money, or do you put it into seed treatment or some of these other areas that we have, maybe more short term. Sunflowers, we've got very good data. We've got data from North Dakota State University. The issue with sunflowers is a pricing issue. We went out and we talked to a dozen sunflower growers in 2022, and we went out with a pricing which was very close to our break even, very small margins. And unless you find, the highest value sunflower guys that are growing, sunflowers for seed production, it's hard to see how you can economically fit in that large scale. So in sunflowers, I think we still have to do marketing work before we can say we've got a right to play. So we're not doing any more R&D in sunflowers. We will be looking at that once again from a pricing perspective as we move forward.
Great. Thanks, Ashish. I think maybe we could wrap up here if you could leave investors with some future milestones that they should be looking for.
Yeah, I can put it in terms of near-term milestones, and then you can extrapolate that in terms of longer term. But near term in the 2023 season, it's about, we are expecting, commitments from some large growers that are good because they're going to drive future growth. So you want to sign up the 300, 400, 500 acre type growers because that represents, roughly a 500,000 A 500-acre grower represents roughly $100,000 of revenue. So that's important. Opening up new regions. There are pockets of where berries are grown in the US. You almost have to come down to the micro region where, you know, we're opening up new regions because we're cracking into new relationships, right? So that's very important, because that, once you open up a region, represents an opportunity for future growth as well. And then ultimately beyond, and these are all US based, and then outside the US, you know, or I should say still in the US, entry into the foliar business. So for example, you know, can we get the revenue from the BioSafe relationship? That's extremely important. And then a big target, it doesn't drive revenue in 2023, but you know, completing the submission for the European Union, because that is an extremely strategic region under the, you know, the EU Green Deal, where every country is looking at reducing the number of chemical pesticides that farmers are using in that country. So getting the submission in is the first step towards being commercial in Europe a couple of years later.
Perfect. Well, thanks very much, Ashish. And thank you everyone for joining. I know we didn't get to all the questions. We will gather those and answer if you've left your registration within the Zoom app. And also, if you have any additional questions that have not been addressed, please feel free to email them to us at bee@rbmilestone.com. Again, that's bee@rbmilestone.com. Also, this recording will be available on BVectoring's website shortly after the presentation. Thanks again, everybody, and this concludes the webinar.